What's up, Marvel fans? We're the Hills Maniacs, and today we're going to be continuing our series of rewatches of all the MCU movies and deciding what we felt was the best moment from the Avengers. So, looking back on the first Avengers movie, first of all, I enjoyed the entire movie. That's the Marvel movie I've seen the most, probably like 15, 20 times, I think. I can pretty much quote it and remember every scene from that movie, but for me, I think the best scene from that movie in particular is the scene where all of the main characters like Thor and all the Avengers really, and Nick Fury is there as well, are all arguing on the helicarrier. Now the reason I think this is the best scene and not something like, say, the entire ending with like the Battle of New York, I think this one really shows you the differences between the characters, and they all kind of make that known, like Steve Rogers arguing with Tony Stark, and we not only see that throughout this movie, but through the entirety of the MCU. Like, it's the whole reason that these characters never really get along in the MCU. That's what leads to the Civil War later down the road with Captain America Civil War and everything, with Team Iron Man and Team Captain America. And I think it all started here in this one scene. And yeah, they may have been sort of corrupted by like the Loki's scepter, at this time, where it was kind of making them do this, sort of. But I feel like it still showed us each of their flaws that these characters have and why they aren't a great team. Like Bruce Banner even says this in the movie. He says, we're not a team, we're a chemical mixture that makes chaos, like a time bomb. And I think that not only impacted this movie, but the whole MCU. Until the very end, like in Avengers Endgame, is when we finally see these characters actually coexist and finally put aside their differences. It's different to like the Guardians of the Galaxy, when they all had their differences already and they came together immediately. Because of those differences, they put them aside right away and became a good team. Whereas in this case, you'll already see that this is a flawed system. Like Nick Fury's trying to put this team together, and we see all these different flaws and these different personalities of these characters. Steve Rogers thinks everything is, he's trying to do the right thing. Tony Stark is trying to kind of just do his own thing, I guess, and they argue there, and then we see it later down the road. True. So that's why I thought not only was this like a well-acted scene from all the actors and everything, but I think it showed the differences between these characters in a way that I don't think we would have seen had this scene not been in the movie, honestly.
Yeah, I can see why you would pick that. You're right. It does kind of build on the characters, especially when it shows how self-centered Tony really is. Right. Which ends up coming into play later on down the line. So I can see that. But for me, the most impactful moment, I think, of this movie was clearly when Hulk grabbed Loki and smashed him into the ground a bunch of times. That was the most influential no, I'm kidding. Funniest moment in the movie. Yes. But not that, for me, in all seriousness, is the death of Phil Coulson. Yeah. And I think the reason I'm picking that scene is because I think it did exactly what he had hoped it would do, and it gave them that push to have something to fight for. And his trading cards may not have been in his jacket, but it worked to give Captain America at least the incentive to want to do this for somebody who basically laid down their life to save somebody that he really had nothing to do with, because he tried to save Thor after Loki trapped him in that like cage thing with the glass and stuff that was built mostly for Hulk.
Right.
And he really didn't have to do that. But we've seen throughout, and that's why I like when they went back to other moments and just when you rewatch it, the history of S.H.I.E.L.D. and from Captain Marvel on, whenever you would see Agent Coulson as a rookie in Captain Marvel to his death in Avengers, you kind of got to see and like this character for who he was, and you got to see that he was willing to put himself in danger. He helped Pepper in Iron Man. He was there again in Iron Man 2 when Tony was fighting Ivan Vanko, and he was there, of course, in the Avengers, and he was with Nick Fury and Captain Marvel when they ran into Carol Danvers when she came crashing through the blockbuster. So it was just cool to see that evolution, and us getting to know this character along with them also getting to know him basically at the same time. I know Captain Marvel was kind of out of order, but we basically grew with him too. So it was kind of heartbreaking for everybody to see this guy die, and I think that's what gave, at least for Captain America, and it did seem like it actually impacted Tony a lot too, because he was standing there at the cage, kind of, where the cage fell, and he was talking to Steve about Agent Coulson, and he knew him more than Steve Rogers did, but it seemed like he got more of the incentive to want to fight and have that thing to fight for. So I think that is the most impactful moment, and I'm kind of glad Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't canon, because it would take away from that moment of, I mean, yeah, I'd be glad to see Phil Coulson back in the MCU, maybe from the multiversal stuff that's going on, but I don't think they need to have this Coulson still be alive and have it just kind of void out this impactfulness that it had on the Avengers, and even those that didn't know him still knew, and had that incentive to want to fight.
Right, and I think if we hadn't seen him in the other movies and seen him partner with Nick Fury, like Captain Marvel obviously didn't come out yet at this time, like you said, but even just seeing him in those two Iron Man movies and even Thor and everything, you started to get a sense of who he is, and then we see him at the beginning and throughout the rest of the Avengers movie. And I feel like his death wouldn't have been that impactful if he was just some random agent that works under Nick Fury that sacrificed himself to save, basically to try and save Thor, but he fell for Loki's trickery. But I'm glad they at least used a sort of minor character at the time. Like, obviously, he was the star of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when that came out. But, yeah, you're right. I think that is what they are avenging. I think there would be no Avengers without him, because without something to avenge, they can't really live up to that name. And that even comes into play later on with, like, they have to avenge their fallen friends from Infinity War and Endgame and all that stuff. So I think if they had been named the Avengers after this, it might have been more impactful, but that's beside the point.
No, but see, I like that, you brought up about them having to later on basically avenge those that blipped or other fallen heroes, throughout the franchise. And it was basically foreshadowing, kind of like where in this movie they kind of set up that whole Tony sacrificing himself thing, because they said, Cap had said, you're not the type of guy to lay down on the wire, which he basically ends up doing later on. So they kind of foreshadowed that transformation, later on. So this could also be a setup for that. Like, they've already been through this when they lost Coulson, so when it happens again, it makes them just as mad, because now it's like a bunch of more people. And this scene not only affects the Avengers, but if you watch it, because I was watching it on Disney Plus, so I saw the one shot right after it with, I think it was Weapon 47 or some Item 47, whatever it was called, where they're hunting down the Chitauri Tech, and the one guy in there keeps calling Jasper Sitwell Phil, which was Agent Coulson, and so it shows the impact that he had, not just on the Avengers, but everybody that knew him. And it would be different, like you said, if it was just like, no offense, but if it was like Maria Hill, like,
yeah, I mean, we didn't,
she's been in like what, three scenes with, like, who cares? No offense to her, but like, it wouldn't have been as impactful if she just showed up and just like died.
Right, and this was, like you said, the deciding thing that leads to them putting aside their differences momentarily, at least, to defend New York, because that's what Coulson wanted. He wanted this group to form, so that kind of ties back into my best moment as well, with them arguing, because before this they were fighting and everything else, and then Coulson gets killed, and now it's like, alright, well, let's finish this fight, And then you see they start to drift apart again later on in later movies and stuff. And that's basically why they lose to Thanos, because they were separated and they weren't strong enough because they weren't together, as a unit.
And I think it also kind of shows, at least maybe Tony and Cap, that S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't all that bad. Because at this point, they had that notion that Nick Fury was hiding something, and then when they found out that he was planning on creating, like an arsenal with the Tesseract, they didn't really trust him anymore, so they were losing faith in S.H.I.E.L.D. And I think Coulson gave them that, like, when they saw him make that sacrifice to save people that he didn't know because he believed in them, it gave them that sense that, okay, hey, maybe S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't as bad as we thought, which allowed them to then basically work with Nick Fury, not just in this movie, but way later on down the line.
Right, that's a good look at it. And I'm not even sure, I can't quite remember if Coulson was also part of that argument, because I know they were arguing with, like, Maria Hill and Nick Fury and all them in that scene that I was referring to. But the fact that Coulson wasn't part of that either, like, maybe if he had been in the room at that time, maybe he would have kind of, sort of helped them put aside their differences or been the voice of reason or whatever. You could argue that none of them were really thinking straight because of, like I said, Loki's scepter. But if he had been part of that, then maybe that would have gone a little bit differently. Maybe they would have devised a plan to work together long before Coulson even died, and maybe Coulson wouldn't have had to die because of that, So kind of both of our moments sort of tie in and really impact not just the Avengers in this movie, but these characters throughout the rest of the MCU.
I mean, and they take place, not that far apart.
Right, exactly. It's like movie. The next scene or so.
Because right after your scene is when Loki attacks
the hell. Yeah, so they kind of bleed into each other.
Barton attacks the helicarrier. Loki's already there, but yeah.
These scenes bleed into each other, which impacts it even more. It's like you see
Thor
this
and Hulk fight, and
right. You start to see the characters falling apart, by arguing with each other, and then they're coming together moment following Agent Coulson's death. But let us know what you guys think down in the comments section. What in your opinion was the most impactful moment or the best well-acted scene or whatever from the first Avengers movie? Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more.
And remember, leave the scumbaggery at home, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye guys.